In this lesson, we want to talk about the reduction formula, and we want to focus most particularly on the positive angles and the negative angles. So what happens is with the positive angles are read from the positive terminal of the x-axis or the positive arm of the x-axis, which is this side of the x-axis. In the anti-clockwise direction towards the terminal arm of the Cartesian plane. So terminal arm is any line that we can draw. Let's just draw any line from the origin, right? So this is the terminal arm. So if we read our angle from the positive arm of the x-axis towards the terminal arm, then that direction is the one that we regard as positive. So, talking of any angle that lies between 0 and 90 degrees, it is realized that these angles actually do have another angle, or it does have another angle that has a relationship with it that is also in the other three remaining quadrants. Okay, so we have the first quadrant, we have the second quadrant, we have the third quadrant, and then we have the fourth quadrant. So considering the direction that we are taking, we are saying we are going in the anti-clockwise direction. So apparently that's the positive direction. So somehow if you look closely, it somehow contradicts logic, or it somehow tends to contradict the normal way of thinking. You will kind of think that the clockwise direction is the one that is supposed to be positive, while the anti-clockwise has to be negative. But in the real sense, it's not like that. It is actually the anti-clockwise that is positive, while the clockwise direction is actually what? Is actually negative. So we ought to understand it that way. Okay, so having illustrated or having explained that the first quadrant is where our theta lies, it means in the second quadrant is where we now have 180 minus theta. Then in the third quadrant, we now have 180 plus theta. Then in the fourth quadrant is now where we have 360 minus theta. So these are our 4 quadrants that we have, right? So having done this is the positive direction that we have taken, which is the anti-clockwise direction. So this is where we have 0 degrees. Of course, there we are going to have 90 degrees. Then, of course, here we have 180 degrees. And here we have 270 degrees. And then back again at 0, which means we've completed now at 360 degrees, which is the revolution. Right, so this is our first cycle, or our first revolution, where we have our 4 quadrants having been represented by theta, 180 minus theta, 180 plus theta, 360 plus theta. So it tends to happen that all in the first quadrant, all the ratios cosine, sine, and tan, they are all positive. Then in the second is only sine that is positive. In the third, it is only tan that is positive. And in the fourth quadrant is the cos that is a positive. So we have formed what is affectionately known as the cast diagram, normally known as the cast diagram, right? So it happens now that each of these the quadrants that we have, we now need to understand that in the second quadrant, what is happening is sine 180 minus theta, obviously it's going to be positive sine theta, because in the second quadrant, remember, sine is what? Is positive. Then cos 180 minus theta is obviously going to be negative cos theta. Tan 180 minus theta is negative tan theta. Third quadrant, it is the same thing. Sine 180 plus theta is going to give us a negative sine theta. Cos 180 plus theta is giving us also a tan theta, because we are in the third quadrant and tan is the only one that is actually positive and the rest are negative. So it happens again in the same way that when we are now in the fourth quadrant In the fourth quadrant, it is the same thing. Cos is the only one that is positive, while the rest of them are actually negative. So having said that, it means the positive angles have to be known this way. So here is my advice that I want to emphasize on. It's good to understand the first, the positive angles first, so that the negative angles, you can just relate them to the positive angles. It becomes easier that way. So I am saying, if we can understand the positive angles very well, it means we will simply make the negative angles, or we will simply create a relationship between the negative angles and the positive angles. So having illustrated or having explained the positive angles, let us try now to indicate or to show the negative angles. Right, so here is what happens now. Here's what is going to happen. When we now indicate the positive angles, we need to understand that we are now taking this other direction. In this direction, this is the direction now that we are taking for the negative angles. We are now going in this direction. But however, our Cartesian plane hasn't changed. We still have this as the fourth quadrant. We still have this one as the first, this one as the second, and this one as the third. But however, the direction that we are now taking is implying that this is going to be negative 90 degrees, while this is going to be negative 180 degrees. And this is going to be negative 270 degrees until we are back at zero with a negative 360 degrees. So in other words, we are saying what we are calling minus 90 is 270 degrees. What we call minus 180 is 180 degrees in some sense, in the sense that we can try to give a relationship between those angles, even though we are going in a different direction altogether, right? So now when we are presented with negative angles, let's assume first we have negative theta. Negative theta is the first angle that we meet in the fourth quadrant here, negative theta. So the relationship that negative theta has, assuming we want sine negative theta. Sine negative theta is going to be, we understand that in the fourth quadrant, sine is actually, it is actually negative. So for that reason, sine negative theta is obviously going to give us negative sine theta. Same applies cos negative theta. What do we understand of cos in the fourth quadrant? Cos is actually positive in the fourth quadrant. So therefore, cos negative theta is obviously going to give us positive cos theta. Same applies with tan negative theta. It means also tan negative theta is going to give us negative tan theta. Why negative tan theta? Because tan is negative in the fourth quadrant. So we are saying negative theta is found in the fourth quadrant. So exactly what was happening to 360 minus theta, it is also happening also to negative theta. It is the same thing that is happening, right? So having established that relationship, let us also look at the next angle that we are going to have in the third quadrant. In the third quadrant, we are going to have theta minus 180. Theta minus 180 is a negative angle. That's the third quadrant. So as usual, sine theta minus 180, it's also supposed to give us a negative sine theta. But how can we know? How can we know the relationship that sine theta minus 180 has? There are two ways of doing it, which means in order to establish what is sine theta minus 180, we have two methods to use. So I'm going to quickly explain them here, how you identify them. Okay, the first one is to quickly relate this theta minus 180 with the positive angles that we already know of. So here is what I'm going to do, guys. We said there is minus 90 degrees and 270 degrees. How can we know where minus 90 degrees lies? We can simply rotate minus 90 degrees until it is back to where it is in the counterclockwise direction, which means in an anti-clockwise direction. So how can we do that? We can simply say, okay, minus 90 plus 360. By so doing, by adding a 360 to minus 90, we are rotating minus 90 so that it goes in an anti-clockwise direction back to where it is. So what does it give us? Minus 90 plus 360, it's going to give us positive 270. So you can see indeed that minus 90 degrees lies exactly where 270 degrees is. So as already having understood that 270 degrees was established by going in the anti-clockwise direction. So it means it's easier now to relate with minus 90 degrees. Okay, why am I mentioning this? So that we can still do the same thing here on the first method of establishing where sine theta minus 180 is. What we can simply do is we can just add a 360 onto theta minus 180. So just add 360. So if we add theta minus 180 plus 360, what do we end up having? We end up having theta plus 180 degrees y minus 180 plus 360 obviously is going to give us 180 degrees. Okay, so looking at the positive angles that we have established, where is theta plus 180? Theta plus 180, which apparently is also 180 plus theta, it's in the third quadrant. And what do we understand in the third quadrant? We understand that sine is negative. Is negative. Sine 180 plus theta is actually negative sine theta. So therefore, it follows that this sine theta plus 180 that we've established is indeed equal to negative sine theta. We have dealt with our theta minus 180. It's obviously going to give us what? Minus sine theta. We simply add 360 degrees. By so doing, what are we doing? We are rotating it through the anti-clockwise direction that we are somehow familiar with. Okay, so this marks method one. Method two, what can we do? This is alternatively. We can just take our sine theta minus 180. Then what do? We factor out the negative. So we have sine negative factor of minus theta plus 180 degrees. So in factoring out the negative, how can we know that we've done the correct thing? If you multiply this negative back into the bracket, it should give you an exact result that you were having before. Like if you say negative times negative theta, obviously you're going to get the positive theta that you're having. Negative again times positive 180, you should get negative 180 degrees. So you are back to where you are. So indeed, you have factored out correctly. So what do you do now after factoring out? You are now treating this whole part minus theta plus 180 as if it's one angle. So let's assume maybe it's beta as an angle. Let's say it's now a beta. So it means we have something like this, sine minus beta. This is what we have now. But we understand that sine negative an angle, negative beta, obviously is going to be found in the fourth quadrant. And in the fourth quadrant, sine is negative. So it means this is going to give us negative sine what? Beta. But remember, our beta, it is this angle here. That's the one we are saying. Let us assume that it's our beta is one angle. That's minus theta plus 180. So we are saying now we are dealing with negative sine minus theta plus 180. But minus theta plus 180, guys, it's important to know that minus a plus b is actually equal to b minus a. It's one and the same thing, just like minus 3 plus 7 is equal to 7 minus 3. We are going to get the same value. Even the calculator can testify to that. So it is the same thing. So it means that we have this angle here. We have this minus theta plus 180. We have it among the positive angles. Where is it found? It's found in the second quadrant. That's where we find it. So it's in the second quadrant. So what do we know in the second quadrant? We know that sine is actually positive. So what is that going to give us? It's going to give us negative. Remember, we have already factored out the negative. So it's going to be negative sine theta. We are dealing only with this part first, as if we don't see the negative, as if we don't see it. Then after that, we then multiply the negative so that our result becomes negative what? Sine theta. So we are still arriving at the same result. These are two methods that we can use. So it means every negative angle, we can have this approach to it. Okay, so it follows therefore that the other negative angles can also be established in the same way. Let's quickly address the one for cos theta minus 180. Cos theta minus 180. Obviously, cos theta minus 180 is going to give us, so I'm going to refer to the first method. Of course, both of them can give us the result. So for the sake of progress in time, I'll just stick to the first method. Okay, so we have cos theta minus 180 plus 360. We are rotating. So all negative angles, we can opt just add a 360 onto them. What is it going to give us? It's going to give us cos theta plus 180. Then what are we going to say? What is cos theta plus 180? It's found in the third quadrant. So in the third quadrant, is theta positive or negative? It is negative. So therefore, this is going to give us a what? A negative cos theta. Therefore, it follows that the rest we can also identify them in that way. Talk of tan theta minus 180. Again, it's going to be tan theta minus 180 plus 360. So we can also get it in the same way. What is it going to give us? It's going to give us tan theta plus 180. But tan theta plus 180, what do we know? It's positive. It is in the third quadrant, and tan in the third quadrant is actually positive. So it will remain as tan what? As tan theta. That's what we are going to get. So this is how we deal with negative angles, which means the rest we can also find. From theta minus 180, we also have negative theta minus 180. So negative theta minus 180 can be found in the second quadrant. So it is the same thing again. Say we want sine minus theta minus 180. We can still do the same thing. We have minus theta minus 180 and the 360. So I'm sticking to the first method, but I'm saying it's not the only method we're having. We can factor out the negative there, and we can deal with it in that way, in the way that I've explained the other method there. So I'm just saying, for the sake of progress in time, I will just explain one method in the meantime, but it is going to give us the same result. So we will say minus theta plus 180. Why? Because minus theta plus 180 obviously is going to give us a positive 180. So at the end, what are we having? Sine minus theta plus 180 is going to give us in which quadrant is minus theta plus 180? Remember the idea that I was explaining here to say that no, minus a plus b is the same as b minus a. So obviously this is the same thing. It's going to give us sine theta. Why sine theta? Because in the second quadrant, sine is positive, right? So the rest, they can still be identified in the same way. So quickly, cos minus theta minus 180. What is it going to give us? Obviously, it's going to give us a negative cos theta. Then how about tan? Tan minus theta minus 180. What is it going to give us? It's also going to give us a negative tan theta. Then how about the one that is now found in the fourth quadrant? The one that is found in the fourth quadrant is actually theta minus 360. This one is now found in the first quadrant. So following the same criteria, we can still establish that sine theta minus 360, what is it going to give us? We can still establish it again. So all of them, we can still have them in the same way. We can still arrive